Hello, everybody. Welcome to another edition of Spirion Tech Talks. I'm your host, Tony Napolillo with Spirion, and with me is our resident expert on all things Spirion product, Jeremy Fields. Jeremy, thank you so much for joining us today. We're going to be exploring something really great today, the Spirion Scripting Engine. Jeremy's going to run through a detailed demonstration, and then we're going to take questions. Before we get into the demonstration, Jeremy, tell us what makes a scripting engine so unique.
Sure. Yeah. Thank you, Tony, and glad to be here. Really, the idea with today's topic is automation at its core is the only way to ensure meaningful outcomes can be executed to scale with any solution, but particularly when we're talking about data discovery. And when you have privacy-grade discovery, as you will with the Spirion Discovery Scan, you have a lot of options built into the console in terms of the classification and remediations that can happen afterward, thanks to, once again, the automation of SDM Workflows and SDP Playbooks. But through the scripting engine, we can also now incorporate additional logic to where, to put it as a cliche, the world is your oyster. Anything you can think of in terms of PowerShell, Python, or any of the other tools you're already familiar with in terms of adding in code through this extensibility feature is really going to be at the focus of today's conversation, and how you can make that scripted automation work for you at scale to drive those selective outcomes from your discovery scans with Spirion.
Very cool, Jeremy. I'm excited to see this demonstration. So let's get into that right now.
Sounds good. Spirion Scripting Engine is a powerful tool that allows for extensible automation in both sensitive data manager and sensitive data platform solutions. Referencing a set of predefined variables, console operators can incorporate custom logic using either batch or PowerShell scripting when configuring policies for automated remediation. This opens up opportunity for seamless integrations with third-party APIs or anything else that can be executed from a CLI. Today, we will take a look at a few scripts in both SDM and SDP, concluding with an example that classifies and audits access to unstructured data residing in Google Drive. Before jumping into today's demonstration, I first want to introduce the list of variables that are available to the scripting engine. This list is readily accessible from the SDM user manual, with these same variables being supported by SDP as well. Note that some variables are referencing scan data for individual match locations, while others return totals relative to the entire scan. Our first two examples will be configured using sensitive data manager via workflows. Note that the flexibility of workflow definitions can be used to refine the scope of where automation should run, as I have done today by limiting the script to match definitions within a particular directory, though additional workflow logic can be added as desired. The script itself is added under the Actions tab, where it can be selected as a remediation action. For this initial scan, I have created two workflow examples, one for batch and one for PowerShell, both of which will execute at the end of a scan we will kick off in just a moment. Let's take a moment prior to, however, to check out the scripts themselves. These samples will simply write the variable information from a scan to a text file for our initial demonstration. I should take a moment to excuse my PowerShell, knowing that these serve as crude examples to serve as a starting point for subsequent iteration. Now, I will use the Spirion agent to scan the directory specified in the workflows we looked at in the SDM console. I should also emphasize that the examples we cover today are available for reference in the Spirion Marketplace or as standalone downloads. When the scan concludes, we will see that two text files were written to the temp directory as specified in both of the scripts. These two text files are identical other than how they were generated, one of course from a batch script and the other from PowerShell. Moving to a new target directory, I want to introduce one last example in SDM, where a PowerShell script will organize the variables into CSV instead of text file output. Using the agent to scan the location associated with this workflow, we can see how the Spirion Scripting Engine can facilitate outcomes such as ad hoc reporting or anything else that can be conceived of within PowerShell on its own. One last concept to consider when working with the Spirion Scripting Engine is that batch and PowerShell are only the beginning of what can be leveraged in terms of scripting or programming language based on the task at hand, since either can call external programs. Take this simple batch script, for example, which is designed to pass the location variable into a Python script to streamline prototyping of advanced logic. An added benefit to this is that only a simple one-liner is uploaded to the Spirion console, meaning the actual script itself, including any secrets, remain completely in your control. For our last two examples, we'll move over to SDP. Sensitive Data Platform expands on the workflow automation introduced in Sensitive Data Manager by streamlining separate workflows into unified data privacy playbooks. Now, instead of having to create individual policies for selective remediation, logical controls are centralized within a single interface. This playbook is going to run the batch command we just looked at whenever a social security number is detected at a match location. To do so, we simply add an action card set to execute script and choose the desired script. Our first example using Python will output a text file of locations containing matches per the playbook logic, meaning any files containing social security numbers. To do this, I've placed the Python script in the location referenced in the batch file uploaded to the SDP console. Using Python in this capacity, the script logic itself only needs to reside on the agent host. Moving back to SDP, we'll kick off a scan targeting Google Drive. While the creation of a text file will indicate the completion of this scan, you can also monitor agent logs to determine the status. While we wait, let's look closer at the Python script. One thing to mention is that we are passing the location variable into the script as a command line argument using the system module. Opening up the generated output, we can now see that 6 locations in this scan have confirmed matches for social security numbers, something we can also validate by going into SDP, viewing scan results, and similarly looking at the executed playbook logic to confirm that the script has indeed run per the playbook's settings. For our last scan, we can incorporate Google Drive's Python SDK to integrate native Google features with SDP Playbooks using Spirion Scripting Engine. Since the playbook itself is only referencing the batch file invoking the Python script, no changes need to be made to the playbook. Instead, we will replace the contents of the Python file residing on the agent host with the additional logic to interface with the Google Drive API. Prior to doing so, however, let's take a look at the drive location we are scanning. Here you can see a variety of files, including cloud-native docs and unstructured data uploaded to the drive location, noting that there is the option in the Google Drive console to apply classification labels that would be native to the Google platform itself. Also take note that this document has been shared with external users as well. Moving back to our agent host, the Google Drive API Python script is ready to be set in the location called by the SDP playbook. For additional details regarding how this script was written, please refer to the Spirion Marketplace extension documenting this process. We will replace the Python logic before running this scan policy a second time, now with the additional logic expected to run at the end of the scan. This API script includes a logging mechanism that will capture the locations that would be targeted in the remediation logic, in addition to being able to confirm whether or not a location has been shared by internal external users within this log file. Moving back to the Google Drive interface, we can also see that the classification has been applied and is consumable now by Google Drive users for all offending locations. Of course, this being file matches with social security numbers detected per the Spirion playbook logic. This covers but a handful of examples showcasing the potential of Spirion Scripting Engine. Keep in mind that the Spirion Marketplace has additional documentation for today's Google Drive example, as well as references for additional third-party logic, such as integrating with Box Shields API, advanced image redaction, and more. We will now take some time to address any questions that popped up during our demonstration. Thank you to everyone who attended this session, and I very much look forward to us meeting again to discuss future Tech Talk topics.
That's great, Jeremy. Really robust capabilities there. I do have some questions for you. What agent platforms support scripting?
So it's going to be Windows only, meaning the Windows agent can call batch, B-A-T-C-H, not B-A-S-H, or PowerShell, knowing that obviously both of those, as we saw in the demo, can be a gateway to any other, invocable CLI perspective.
And will scripts written for SDM work for SDP?
Absolutely. Really, there's no difference at all other than how they're orchestrated, knowing that SDP has playbooks versus the linear SDM workflows. So you'll be able to orchestrate your scripts more intuitively, just thanks to how automation is handled in SDP. But compatibility, there's no difference between the two.
And if somebody wants to get a list of variables, where do they go for that?
So it's best collected in the SDM user manual, a link that we'll provide at the tail end of this demonstration, wherever we upload it. You'll have some links that you can click on to get to that sort of information. We'll make sure it's available.
Wonderful. And if somebody wants to pass classification details into a script, what do they do?
So while that's not a variable, the idea would be whether it's a branch of logic within a playbook or intuitively just associated with a classification in a workflow, you'll be able to organize that logic and just account for it at the script level without passing it as a variable one way or another.
And I think a lot of people might want to know, when do scripts run during a scan?
So they run at the tail end. After all of the locations in scope have been evaluated for matches, you'll then see, if you look at the logs themselves, the script starting to be executed once that scan is finished before the entire task itself is completed.
That's great.
And it does run, just one footnote there. I should mention it runs as the local system account. So when you're writing these scripts, you want to make sure whether it's access to specific Python modules or whatever it may be, that that access is available to the local system account by default.
Great. So I think we should talk about troubleshooting. If someone wants to troubleshoot scripts that aren't working, what's the process?
So really just keying off of the last two comments, right? The idea is the Spirion logs themselves will validate that the automation as orchestrated by the workflow or the playbook has been triggered properly as expected. But that's obviously independent of the script logic itself executing as desired. And so the best way to troubleshoot the script after we can confirm that it did run through the Spirion log would be to elevate a shell, whether that's a PowerShell terminal or a standard command line prompt, as the local system account using a tool like psexec. Elevate that to, once again, the context that we're running as with the Spirion discovery scan. And at that point, running that script manually in that elevated session should, let's say, weasel out any sort of errors that you're getting one way or another from the script itself, if that is occurring.
Staying on the script theme, where can people find examples of scripts? Can they be found anywhere?
So we will have some links at the tail end of this if you are catching the webinar after the fact, let's say on YouTube. So check the comments there for a list of links, but categorically, this type of work is available in the Spirion marketplace as extensions. You'll see we have extension guides available for anything from the Google Doc walkthrough that we just saw in the video today, all the way through to just generic guidance for Python execution. Really all you would need to get started on that front right there in the marketplace.
Great point that we will put a list of resources in the description when we post this on YouTube. How about IDs? How does someone get IDs needed for Google Drive labels?
Yep, so that actually is most readily consumable from what I found using the Google Drive label API, separate from the Google Drive API proper that we saw demonstrated today.
Okay, and finally, if someone applies a third-party classification using a script, should they still apply a Spirion classification as well?
I'd say yes, 9.5 times out of 10. The idea being there's no harm, especially if you're just doing so from a labeling perspective, right? Not embedding that classification as persistent metadata, but allowing you to place the classification both through a script and true that classification action up through the Spirion application really confirms your ability to report on it one way or another, ensuring that the reportability and visibility remains available in both consoles, which you would not have should you only classify through one mechanism as opposed to both.
Well, that's all the questions that I have here. Jeremy, this has been an extremely informative tech talk. important tech talk. I'm glad you ran through it. For those of you joining us, thank you so much for learning more about this important topic and this feature. If you want to learn more, Spirion.com. Also, follow our LinkedIn, and you can find more resources. Thank you again, Jeremy, and for everybody else.
Of course.
We'll see you at the next Tech Talk.
Yep. Thank you all.